Hello everyone. In this session I am going to discuss about oxygen dissociation curve, or it also known as oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve. So what is the meaning of oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve? So this is the plot or the graph which is plotted in between percentage of oxygen saturated of hemoglobin with the oxygen partial pressure. So this graph which shows the relation between the partial pressure with the percentage of saturated hemoglobin. So what is the meaning of saturated hemoglobin? If almost all hemoglobin bind with oxygen, then it is known as the saturated hemoglobin. Okay. So what is the meaning of percentage of saturated hemoglobin? It means if the in percent oxygen is bind with hemoglobin in total, then this is known as the percentage of oxygen saturated of hemoglobin. Okay. So without binding hemoglobin, this is known as the deoxygenated hemoglobin. After binding of oxygen with hemoglobin, then the hemoglobin is known as the oxygenated hemoglobin. Suppose that here it shows the oxygen partial pressure. So with the increasing of partial pressure of oxygen, there is the increasing of affinity with the hemoglobin and oxygen. Okay. So at the initial stage, there is the increasing of partial pressure, but the affinity which not approximately more here. Okay, slightly less. But after some point, then the affinity will increase with the increasing of partial pressure of oxygen. Okay. Then again, after certain level, with the increasing of partial pressure, the availability of hemoglobin goes down. That's why the affinity again it goes to stable. Okay. So it means that here the hemoglobin is saturated in this point, and in this point the low affinity, and in this point there is the gradual increasing of affinity of oxygen with hemoglobin, and this curve which forms a S shaped, which is known as the sigmoid curve, and this curve is known as oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve. So this curve is plotted in normal temperature. Suppose that the body temperature approximately 37 degrees centigrade, and the normal partial pressure, suppose that the normal partial pressure of the oxygen which is 104 mmHg. Okay. So 100 mmHg partial pressure which present at the lungs, the venous blood of lungs. So in lungs, the blood, the capillary which present in lungs, the partial pressure of oxygen is more, which is about 104 mmHg. But in tissue, this is the tissue, there is the gradual decrease or gradual less number of the partial pressure of oxygen. Suppose that in tissue, suppose that this is 10, suppose that 20, 40, then 60, suppose that this is 80, then 100. Okay. Suppose that in 80, in here, suppose that this is 75. So at the level 75% saturation of oxygen is found at the level of partial pressure about Suppose that 10, 20, 40, 60, 80, then 100. Okay. So the partial pressure, with the increasing of partial pressure, there is the saturation of hemoglobin. So in tissue, in arterial blood, the partial pressure which is 40 mmHg, but still there is the 75% saturation of blood. 75% saturation of blood. Okay. So this is the normal plot, and this plot is known as the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve. Okay. With the decreasing of affinity, with hemoglobin, oxygen and hemoglobin, if the affinity decrease, then the plot which shifted to right side, okay. So in which condition the affinity goes down in between oxygen and hemoglobin? Suppose that in case of high temperature, suppose that if you do more exercise, then your body temperature goes up, suppose that 43 degrees centigrade, then this curve shifted to right. It means that the affinity goes decreasing here. Okay. Suppose that in high H plus ion is more, it means that acidic or the pH goes down. With the pH, if lowering of pH, acidic condition which hinders the binding of oxygen with hemoglobin. Okay. Then suppose that increasing of 2,3-diphosphoglycerate. So 2,3-diphosphoglycerate, it is produced in the RBC during the catabolic process of the breakdown process of the glucose. So glucose breakdown or the glycolysis process which produce 2,3-diphosphoglycerate. So with the increasing of 2,3-diphosphoglycerate, which reduce the affinity of oxygen with hemoglobin. Okay. So these are the different points, and another may be if the increasing of partial pressure of carbon dioxide also decrease the affinity of oxygen with hemoglobin. So these are the different conditions you have to remember. Suppose that, so this is the affinity is decreasing here. Suppose that temperature is reduced. Suppose that temperature is reduced. Suppose that H plus ion goes down, pH become higher, then the acidic to neutrality shift to acidic to neutrality or alkaline. If the 2,3-diphosphoglycerate goes down, partial pressure of carbon dioxide goes down, then the affinity will increase. So more oxygen will bind with the hemoglobin. That's why the graph which shifted to left side. Okay, which shifted to left side. Okay, so this is the shifted to left side. So this is the actual different condition in which this oxygen dissociation curve, it may shift to right and left. In which condition it shifts to right when the affinity goes down, oxygen and the hemoglobin, then the curve shift to right. If affinity goes up, then oxygen, more oxygen bind with hemoglobin, then it shift to left. Okay. So this is the your right side. This is the lowering of affinity, and this is the left side. This is the increasing of affinity. So these are the condition in which this graph it may shift right and left. This is whole about of the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve or ODC, which is a sigmoid shaped curve. Thank you for watching.